Hawk River, Washington Territory, 1886. Rainwater still fell from the cedar branches when Alice Ward stepped onto the unfinished bridge. Below her, Hawk River rolled black beneath the morning fog, twisting white foam around uprooted logs. One misstep would take her life. If her final apple shipment did not cross before the first snow, Ward Orchard Farm might not survive until spring. If a frontier survival romance could begin in such a place, it would not begin gently. Alice never looked down. Her attention remained fixed on a white hen standing halfway across a rain-slick beam. The bird pecked calmly at the mud, showing less concern for the river than any sensible creature should have possessed. At the far end of the bridge, Hugh Sawyer tightened a rope around his wrist. "Your chicken is on my land again," he said. "This time she is using the bridge. I ought to charge her a toll." Alice took another careful step. "Your fence is still 4 feet out of place. My father built it 20 years ago. Then he was wrong for a very long time." Her laughter rose above the rain, bright and unguarded. Hugh almost smiled, though his grip on the rope did not loosen. If Alice slipped, he was the only man close enough to pull her back. If the bridge failed, he would lose his reputation, his trade, and the last working legacy his father had left him. The hen scratched at the beam. A thin layer of mud slid away. Fresh sawdust lay beneath it. Alice stopped laughing. Hugh moved toward her, dropped to one knee, and brushed the loose wood aside. A deep cut crossed the underside of the beam. It was straight, deliberate, and far too clean to have been made by floodwater or rot. Someone had weakened the bridge by hand. "Do not touch it again," Alice said quietly. Hugh looked up at her. For the first time that morning, the woman standing above the deadly current was the calmer of the two. Across the river, Gideon Frost waited beside his ferry. His black coat hung motionless in the rain. Both hands rested on the railing. He did not look surprised. Hugh raised his head. Gideon pulled the ferry bell once. No passengers waited at the landing. No one answered. The metal note traveled across the water, while Gideon kept his eyes on the saw cut beneath Hugh's hand. Hugh stayed on the bridge until the rain had become a cold film across his coat. He knelt beside the damaged beam and traced the grain with 2 fingers. The cut was not deep enough to bring the structure down at once. It had been placed to weaken the timber slowly beneath freight wagons. Alice stood behind him with the white hen tucked against her chest. Whoever did this knew exactly where to cut. Hugh marked the underside of the beam with chalk. He did not answer. Speaking Gideon Frost's name without proof would turn suspicion into war. And in Hawk River, a man could lose his livelihood simply by standing on the wrong side. By noon, word had reached Dora Lane's general store. Gideon arrived last, carrying the smell of wet leather and river water. He said the flood had warped the timber. He said Hugh had chosen the wrong beam. He said every bridge eventually collected the price of the builder's pride. Hugh watched him. "Floodwater does not leave a saw cut." Gideon shrugged. "Then prove it before you frighten the settlement." He laid a notice on the counter. Beginning the next morning, Frost Ferry and Freight would double the crossing charge for wagons and triple it for cattle. Alice read the figures without blinking. Her final apple shipment had to leave Ward Orchard Farm within 8 days. If it failed to cross before the first hard freeze, the fruit would soften in storage, and the money meant for winter feed would disappear with it. This was no longer only a damaged bridge. It was frontier survival, measured in tolls, weather, and the days remaining before winter. Gideon turned toward her. "I can buy the whole crop today, at half its value. At the value of goods trapped on this side of the river." Then he faced Hugh and offered enough repair work to carry Sawyer River Ranch through the winter. Wagons, storage sheds, ferry buildings. There was only one condition. Hugh had to abandon the bridge. He refused. That night, he returned alone with a lantern. The chalk mark beneath the beam had been wiped away. The new bridge spike at the north support was gone. Someone had returned after dark, and whoever controlled the river was no longer waiting for the bridge to fail on its own. By morning, Hugh had nailed a plank across the entrance to Hawk River Bridge. No freight wagon would cross until he had inspected every brace, spike, and joint. Men stood in the rain and watched the structure as they might watch a horse that had already kicked someone. No one trusted it, but everyone still needed it. Alice arrived with a wagon of apples. During the night, Hugh's horse had slipped through the fence and eaten nearly a full basket of fruit she had already sorted for shipment. "Your horse seems fond of stranded merchandise," she said. Hugh examined the bitten apples. "He has expensive taste." "Then you can pay according to his taste." Hugh paid twice their value. It was not charity. The damage bore his name, and he would answer for it. That was how ranch life worked in Hawk River. A broken fence, a hungry animal, or a careless decision could cost someone part of a winter. By noon, Gideon Frost stood inside Dora Lane's general store, speaking loudly enough for every customer to hear. A man who cannot keep the spikes in his own bridge ought to go back to making chairs. The room fell quiet. Hugh did not answer. Anger would give Gideon exactly what he wanted. A craftsman defending his pride before he could defend the truth. Gideon turned toward Alice. He said Ward Orchard Farm had survived only because Hugh repaired her fences, hauled her goods, and spoke for her when business became difficult. Alice placed one hand flat against the counter. "I have kept my father's farm standing for 2 years, and that bridge was built with sound timber. I watched every beam arrive." She defended Hugh's workmanship before Hugh found the courage to defend her honor. Every face in the store turned toward him. He wanted to answer Gideon. He wanted to tell the room that Alice had never needed a man to manage her land or choose her words. But he hesitated. The silence lasted only a few seconds. It was still long enough. Alice looked at him, then walked away. That evening, Frank Bell found Hugh beside the closed bridge. "You are trying to avoid a war," Frank said. "Gideon has already started one." Hugh doubled the night watch and hid his tools in the small shed on the north bank. While he prepared to guard the bridge, Alice followed a fresh trail of mud from the damaged support toward Frost's ferry landing. One footprint held the mark of a heel nail broken cleanly in half. 3 nights later, the rain finally eased. The people of Hawk River gathered inside the community barn to mark the harvest, though everyone knew too many crates still sat trapped on the wrong side of the river. A fiddle moved slowly beneath the rafters, and oil lamps threw long shadows across coats that had not fully dried. Hugh stood near the door. Alice was across the room speaking with Dora Lane. He did not seek her out, yet his eyes kept returning to the same place. They met beside the coffee table. "Is your horse planning to ruin any more crops?" Alice asked. "He is considering the corn. I will send the bill in advance." Hugh almost laughed. For a few minutes, the familiar whoosh rhythm between them pushed the damaged bridge, Gideon Frost, and the coming winter beyond the barn walls. It was the easiest part of their slow-burn Western romance, though neither of them had yet named it. Then Caleb, a young man newly arrived in Hawk River, stepped forward and asked Alice to dance. Hugh looked at the hand Caleb offered her. Something cold tightened beneath his ribs before reason could interfere. Still, he smiled. "You should accept," Hugh said. "If you keep arguing with everyone this way, you may never find a husband." Alice did not look at Caleb. She looked at Hugh. The amusement left her eyes. She was not angry. Her stillness was worse because it left him nowhere to hide. She moved half a step closer. "Unless you ask." Her voice was low enough for him alone. Then she declined Caleb and walked toward Dora as if nothing had happened. With 4 quiet words, Alice placed the next choice entirely in Hugh's hands. He remained where she had left him while the fiddle continued. Later, Hugh walked toward Sawyer River Ranch beneath a sky sealed with clouds. He remembered every unnecessary visit to South Creek, the light in Alice's window each evening, and the bitterness that had seized him when another man approached her. He had called his hesitation caution. The truth was simpler. He was afraid. Hoofbeats sounded behind him. Frank Bell reined in hard beside the road, his face drained of color. "Another brace has been cut," he said. "This time, there is still a freight wagon on the bridge." Hugh and Frank rowed hard toward Hawk River Bridge as the rain returned, slanting across the river. A flour wagon stood near the center span, its rear wheel resting directly over the fractured brace. Alice was already there. She worked without shouting, lifting one sack at a time and passing it toward two men on the bank. No one hurried more than necessary. One careless step could send the weakened timber into the current. Hugh lowered himself beneath the bridge with a rope around his waist. One hand gripped the line, while the other found the fresh cut. Same depth, same angle. At the edge of the wound, the wood carried the scar of a saw, missing one tooth. "The same man," Alice said, when Hugh climbed back onto the deck. The brace answered with a dry crack. They dragged the wagon to safety seconds before the beam dropped. No one died, but the middle of Hawk River Bridge sagged low enough to make the decision for them. Hugh closed the crossing. By morning, wagons lined both banks. Alice had 7 days left to move her final apple shipment. Hugh's lumber, Dora Lane's flour, and the cattle of 3 families were trapped. This was frontier survival, reduced to cold arithmetic. Food, livestock, winter feed, and the shrinking number of days before the first hard freeze. Gideon arrived in a covered wagon, dry beneath his black coat, as if the rain had chosen everyone but him. He offered to carry the stranded goods across at his new rates. Then he drew Alice aside. "I will move your apples without charge," he said. "Tell them Hugh used poor timber." Alice gave him no answer. Gideon turned to Hugh. "I can keep you working all winter. Warehouses, wagons, ferry buildings. Admit the bridge failed because of your workmanship." Hugh looked at the families waiting beside the river. He thought of Sawyer River Ranch, the coming winter, and his father's workshop. "I need time." Alice heard him. Her expression hardened. "You have had time since the first cut." She turned her wagon toward Ward Orchard Farm. Gideon stepped close. "When the snow comes, they will not remember who cut the bridge. They will remember who still had a way across." Hugh watched the broken span bend under the rain. For the first time, and he understood that standing between two sides was still a choice. The next morning, Hugh arrived at Ward Orchard Farm, carrying a post-hole shovel and 2 cedar stakes. Alice was sealing apple crates when she noticed his tools. "The bridge is the other way. The southeast corner of your fence has been broken since July. I can repair it myself." "I know." The answer stopped her. Hugh had not come because he thought she was helpless. He had come because he could no longer remain across the fence and call his silence caution. He replaced the post in the rain. Alice brought 2 cups of coffee, but did nothing to make the conversation easier. "I was wrong last night," Hugh said. "I asked for time because I was afraid of losing the ranch and my father's workshop." Gideon heard that fear and believed he could buy me. "And can he?" "No." Hugh set down the hammer. "If you still mean what you said, I would like to come to supper properly, not to settle the bridge, not because of the rumors." Alice studied him. "All right, but supper does not erase what is happening. I do not expect it to." That afternoon, they spread the plans across her kitchen table. Hugh proposed 2 support posts in midstream. Alice rejected the idea. She had watched that bend in Hawk River for years and knew the current shifted after heavy rain. Posts in the center would catch every log carried downstream. This time, Hugh listened. Their river crossing survival depended on timber, rope, and trust. They chose angled supports driven from the rocky southern bank, strong enough to carry 1 light wagon at a time. Frank brought timber. Dora lent hauling rope. Other families watched from a distance, unwilling to help, while Gideon controlled the only working ferry. By the 3rd day, the temporary crossing was ready for a test. Alice drove an empty wagon onto the span. Hugh moved below, checking each joint as the wheels passed overhead. Then a low roar came from upstream. Black water surged around the bend, carrying broken branches and mud. The first support shuddered, tore loose from the riverbed, and swung sideways. A timber struck Frank and knocked him down. The bridge tilted. Alice slid from the wagon seat, went over the rail, and caught the planking with one hand. Below her, Hawk River was tearing the temporary bridge apart. Hugh moved before the bridge could tilt farther. He looped a rope around the railing post, dropped flat against the rain-slick planks, and reached for Alice. "Do not look down. You say that as though I intended to." Even then, her voice was steadier than his. Hugh caught her wrist as a section of planking broke beneath her boots. Frank, blood soaking through his sleeve, braced the rope with his uninjured arm. Together, they dragged Alice back onto the bridge before the current tore away the temporary span. By the time they reached shore, the rope had cut deep into Hugh's palm. Frank's shoulder had swollen hard beneath his coat. Part of Alice's apple wagon was gone, scattered downstream with the broken timber. That afternoon, Gideon called the settlement into the community barn. He stood before families whose goods were rotting beside the river and declared that Hugh had built an unsafe crossing. Then he placed a written statement on the table. Hugh was to admit that the temporary bridge had failed because of his design and because Alice had forced him to test it too soon. In return, Gideon would keep the ferry rate unchanged for Sawyer River Ranch, give Hugh work through winter, and demand no payment for the damage. Hugh looked at Alice. She did not ask him to defend her. That made the choice harder. He picked up the paper, then he tore it in half. "I built the temporary span," he said. "Its failure is mine to answer for, but the main beams were cut. I will not sign a lie to save my ranch." For the first time, Hugh chose Old West justice over the safety of his own name. The barn went silent. Some men avoided Gideon's eyes. Others moved closer to Hugh. That evening, Hugh returned to his father's workshop. To repair the bridge, he needed the seasoned cedar beams supporting the roof. Alice stood in the doorway as his injured hand trembled over the first iron pin. "If you take them down," she said, "you will have no workshop for winter." Hugh pulled the pin. The beam struck the floor with a heavy crack. "If keeping it means letting the valley kneel to Gideon," he said, "then it is not a legacy worth keeping." That night, Hugh gave up the last safe road back to the life he had known. Rain returned after midnight. Alice woke to the white hen beating its wings against the coop. When she stepped onto the porch, an orange glow flickered beyond the trees where Sawyer River Ranch stood near the water. It was not a lamp, it was fire. She saddled Duchess and rode through the mud. The cedar beams Hugh had pulled from the workshop were burning beside the shed. Lamp oil hung heavy in the air. Hugh was dragging one timber clear when the upper frame collapsed and pinned his leg beneath a flaming beam. Alice saw a shadow running behind the barn toward the ferry landing. In the mud beside the fence was a footprint marked by a heel nail, broken cleanly in half. The proof was within reach. Then Hugh called her name through the smoke. Alice turned away from the tracks. She brought the apple wagon close to the flames and fastened the hauling rope around the fallen beam. The wagon was too heavy. The last crates of her harvest still filled the bed. Hugh coughed beneath the timber. "Save the apples," he said. "You need them." Alice pulled the wagon pins. Hundreds of apples spilled into the mud, rolling through the rainwater like red coins thrown away. The wagon grew lighter. Duchess strained against the harness. The beam shifted just far enough for Alice to drag Hugh free. Dora, Frank, and the neighboring families arrived after the roof had fallen. They saved the ranch house, but the workshop, the tools, and most of the timber meant for the bridge burned to ash. A doctor wrapped Hugh's right hand and told him the tendons had been damaged. He might hold a hammer again, but never with the same strength. Frank found another matching footprint near the shed. Dora confirmed that one of Gideon's workers had purchased lamp oil before closing. Hugh stared at the ruined apples beneath the wagon wheels. You should have saved the harvest. Alice sat beside him. Apples can be planted again, she said. You cannot. In that moment, their slow-burn Western romance stopped being a promise and became a sacrifice. Before dawn, the ferry bell began ringing without pause. Gideon had loaded families, horses, and freight wagons onto the ferry while the river was still rising. The guide cable stretched tight across the black water, trembling like a string about to break. The ferry cable tore free from the north anchor with a crack like a rifle shot. The flatboat swung broadside in Hawk River. People shouted. Horses kicked against wagon shafts. A flour wagon slid toward the edge, dragging the deck low enough for black water to wash over the planks. Gideon wrenched at the steering lever, but the river no longer answered him. Hugh stood on the bank with his right hand bandaged. He could not close it tightly enough to hold a loaded rope. He looked at the broken bridge frame, then at the last cedar beam saved from the fire. Fasten it to the south support. Frank glanced at Hugh's hand. You cannot hold that weight. Hugh turned toward Alice. She can. Alice backed Duchess and the hauling wagon toward the bank. She looped the line around the axle, secured the other end to the beam, and followed each knot Hugh called out. Frank organized the men on the secondary line. Dora moved the women and children away from the water. The ferry spun toward drifting timber. Alice urged Duchess forward. The rope snapped tight. The cedar beam groaned. What remained of Hawk River Bridge shuddered under the strain. "Cut when I tell you," Hugh shouted. Alice raised the axe. Too soon, and the ferry would be swept toward the rapids. One heartbeat too late, and the bridge would pull everyone on shore into the river. Across the water, Gideon looked at her. For the first time, he was afraid. Hugh waited until the bow turned toward the rocky bank. Now, Alice brought the axe down. The line parted. The ferry struck shore hard enough to crush the railing, but it did not overturn. The center of the bridge collapsed behind it. The final beam from Sawyer's workshop vanished into the black current. After the passengers reached land, Frank opened the compartment beneath the ferry deck. Inside lay the missing bridge spikes, bolts taken from the supports, and a saw with one broken tooth. Gideon's own ferry carried the proof of the sabotage. No one spoke. The people he had controlled now stood between him and the road. Hugh stared at the empty space where the bridge had stood. "I do not know whether I can build it again." Alice stepped beside him. "Then this time, we will not let you build it alone." Winter arrived before Hawk River could raise another bridge. Gideon Frost was taken away to await trial, but his arrest did not bring back the freight, rebuild Sawyer's workshop, or lift Alice's apples from the mud. The people repaired the ferry together and divided food, firewood, and labor among the hardest-hit families. Hugh recovered slowly. His right hand no longer closed all the way. He had to relearn the feel of a plane, guiding it with his left hand, while the injured one steadied the wood. One afternoon, Alice found him at the southeast corner of her fence with a cedar post. "You know I can repair that myself." "I know." Hugh drove the post with his left hand. Alice did not take the hammer. She held the timber when his fingers began to tremble. Later, they sat on the porch at Ward Orchard Farm. Blackened apple stumps stood beyond the yard. Farther off, the bridge supports rose from Hawk River like bare bones. "I cannot promise you an easy life," Hugh said. "I do not know how much this hand will ever do again." Alice studied him. "Are you proposing marriage or reading an inventory of damages?" Hugh reached into his coat and brought out a ring bent from one of the bridge spikes found beneath Gideon's ferry. "I want to argue with you for the rest of my life. Replant what we lost. Build the bridge again, even if this time I have to listen to you more." "How much more?" "About 40%. 50, 40. Alice laughed, the same laugh that had begun beside a stubborn hen and a fence set 4 feet wrong. Then she said yes. Their victory did not erase the burned workshop, the ruined harvest, or the damage to Hugh's hand. It only gave them the right to choose what came next. They married in the spring of 1887 in a ceremony. Young apple trees were planted beside the dead trunks, and a new cedar beam rose over Hawk River. The white hen slipped through the fence again. She still owes me a toll, Hugh said. Alice examined the fence. It is still 4 feet out of place. Hammer blows carried across the valley. They had not preserved everything their fathers left behind. They had preserved the freedom to decide what would be rebuilt. Thank you for staying with Hugh and Alice to the end. If you believe some things are worth rebuilding, subscribe for more cinematic Western romance and frontier survival stories.